Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's session where we are continuing where we left off yesterday. We are still looking at selecting your methodology, focusing specifically on qualitative research method and design. So yesterday we concluded after our discussion on what we were discussing, case studies. So we ended with case studies. So we're going to continue from there today and looking at the next section. Okay, that is if my slide can move. All right, so now that we've engaged with research designs and we've discussed also the different paradigms, we're moving to the next phase of how do you collect your data in qualitative research. So what are the different ways in which you can collect your data and what influences this, right? So one of the ways in which you can collect your data is through interviews. And the ways in which you can conduct your interviews can be divided in various ways. So you can go for structured interviews where you have a protocol. You've got 20 questions, let's say, for example, that you want to ask your participants, and you don't deviate from these questions that you've put together. So this is what we call a structured interview, right? It's very specific in terms of the questions that you want to ask. And then we also have semi-structured interviews. So you do have a set of questions, but these are not set in stone. So what this then means is that you can feed off from the questions that you have. So you may start with a set of questions, so maybe 10 questions, but you are not only restricting yourself to these questions. Maybe a participant answers a question, and based on their answer, you want to ask a follow-up question. So you also want to probe because you want them to explain further, to elaborate on what they've said. So semi-structured data collection allows for this flexibility. It allows for you to do this, but you have a guide that you start with. Right, you have an interview protocol that you start with, but it provides the flexibility as I've indicated. And then, of course, we also have unstructured interviews. So with unstructured interviews, it's very open-ended. You may have a question or two or three as a way to start off the conversation, but what you're interested in is what the participant has to say. So you don't want to ask questions because you're thinking that you don't want to lead the participant in some ways. So usually with this kind of data collection, you will use, if you're interested in things like life narratives or life histories, so biographies of people, for example. So you start by asking a person to tell you about their lives, starting from when they were born, and then the various stages and things that they've encountered in their lives as it relates to the successes, the challenges, up to where they are today. How did they get to where they are today? So let's say, for example, you're interested in stories of CEOs, right? And you're saying, where did it all begin for you? How did you get to this stage where you are now a CEO today? And then you leave it like that. And then a person can start talking and telling you about their life journey up to where they are today in terms of their work or career trajectory, right? So again, that question that you're going to ask will be determined by what is it that you are interested in. What about being a CEO are you interested in? Why would you like to know the life story of people who are CEOs? What is it that you're trying to get at, right? And them telling you about their life stories will assist you to be able to get that understanding. I keep repeating this because it's important that even as you're structuring your interview questions, it always has to be guided by what it is that your research wants to achieve. And how do you formulate your interview questions or the interview guide? You do not just come up with questions, because again, your questions the questions that the participants are going to be answering need to assist you to answer or to achieve your aims and objectives. And therefore, it has to be linked to the focus of your overall research. And that is why literature is also very critical. So if you think about the different steps that you would have followed until you get to the data collection with your proposal, with doing your literature review chapter. So literature is very, very important because it informs you, it assists you to think about the gaps. So when you've identified the gaps in literature, when you identified the gaps in scholarship, then you will know what kind of questions you need to ask, because you know, or you have an idea of where the gaps are. So what kind of questions do you think need to be answered for us to be able to close these gaps? So it's important that as you structure your interview guide, that you read the literature. And by reading the literature, you will be assisted in terms of how to carve your questions, right? What information do you want to get? And as I've indicated, use open questions. That does not require a yes or a no, because if you're asking questions to your participants and they answer and they say yes, and you ask another question and they say yes, and you ask another question, they say no. At the end of the day, what data are you going to be having? What are you going to do with that data? So for you to be able to get rich data, for you to be able to get in-depth data, it's going to be dependent on how you've structured your interview guide. And for you to get these answers, you need to ensure that you ask open questions, right? Questions that require of your participants to elaborate, to express themselves. And do not use leading questions, right? Those of you who are in law might understand this better. Those of you who are interested in law, maybe read law journals or books or watch movies that are about the law. We will know in the courtroom, they will always say, do not ask leading questions. So don't ask the participant questions that are going to lead to the direction that you want. It's important that the questions are structured in such a way that even when you're asking the question, it still answers you and leads you to what you want without you leading the participants, right? So I'm trying to think of an example so that you understand what I'm talking about. So in the example that I've given of a CEO, for example, so your question would be maybe something like, so it requires one to work very hard to become a CEO, right? And you can hear this is a very bad question, a bad formulated question, because a person can just answer and say, yes, it does, right? But at the same time, it's also a leading question, because it has to be the participant that says to you, one really requires dedication and working very hard and have commitment to be able to succeed as a CEO or to achieve the status of a CEO. These are some of the things that leads one to get to that point. So your question should not lead the person to the answer that they're going to give you. And you also want to make your participant to be relaxed at the beginning, right? And not just hit hard at the beginning in terms of asking already very specific questions, very particular questions. So you may want to start with questions that are quite broad, right? Around the experiences of working in a particular environment and what that's like, or just issues around the complexities of being in management. So broad questions that will then lead you to moving towards the specifics. So you're talking about management more broadly, or executive management and what that's like and the complexities of that. And then you move down to the role of being a CEO. Right? So you don't start immediately with the first question on, tell me about what it's like being a CEO. Okay. And then the middle section is where you pursue ideas more in depth, right? You can also use probes from the first set of questions. So with the semi-structured questions, it allows you to do this. With the unstructured interviews, it also allows you to be able to do this. Of course, with the structured interviews, all of this will already be put in place where you have a structure at the beginning with the set questions. So there isn't room to maneuver. But with the semi-structured and the unstructured questions, it allows you to do that. So how people answer will then also influence how the next question is going to be. So you're not married to the 10 questions perhaps that you come with. You might find that by the end of the interview, you've only asked 5 questions and you had scheduled the interview for an hour because the person was saying so much, right? And also from what they were saying, you wanted follow up and you wanted to elaborate, to have them elaborate on that. And from that, you might find that you managed to get all that you needed, right? So, and here you should not be married to the questions that you're going to be asking to such a point that you cut people even while they're expressing all the questions. And this is why we also have the possibility of follow-up interviews. So if by the end of the interview, you've only asked half of the questions that you wanted to, because it was such a wonderful interview, the participant was so responsive, you can always look at the possibility of a follow-up interview. Right. And then the sequence of questions, of course, when you are engaging with the participants, when you're engaging with people, you should not come across as being cold. You should be warm, you should be open, and you should create a space, an environment that allows for the participant to also feel comfortable. And if they perceive you as being cold and not welcoming and open, of course, that might negatively influence the engagement that you're going to be having with the participants. Always remembering what is the purpose of the interview that you are conducting, right? So the questions, what you're asking, how you're asking, and the sequence of asking the question, always with the purpose of ensuring that you want to answer your research questions. Ask about facts. It's easier, right? How long have you lived here? How old are you? If these are the questions, so the demographic questions usually come at the beginning, things that are easy for people to answer. And again, especially depending on the kind of topic, the kind of issue that your research is focusing on. Some of you might be doing research focusing on very sensitive topics, right? So if you're going to come and you're going to be interviewing me and you're going to be asking me perhaps about abortion and the reason why I decided to have an abortion, and how did I go about doing it? Did I get support? Was it difficult? What was it like, the whole process, and then after? So it's something that might evoke emotions in your participants. So obviously you would not want to, at the outset, start asking these kinds of questions. So you try to create an environment where a person feels comfortable, where they feel they can trust you, and that you create an environment where they can be open with you. And so that's why the questions that you ask first are so critical, because they're going to lead to a successful interview or not so successful interview. All right. And ask questions about the now. Easy questions about the present before asking questions about the past or the anticipation of the future. So now that you've had the abortion, do you have any children? Do you anticipate having children? Do you plan to have children? So questions about the future should come later, right? Questions about the past. What is it about or in your past that made you make it the kind of the decision that you did? So asking about the present, about what the person is doing now, where they live, how old they are. So the present, things that are easier to respond to should come first. All right. And it's also advisable to say, what are the most critical things that I would like to have covered in this interview? I said earlier that sometimes the interview might end and you might not have gotten to certain questions in your interview. So try to ensure that the initial questions after the factual ones cover the essential things, right? One would imagine that all the questions that you're going to ask are critical and they're essential. But obviously, if you were to rank your questions, you need to be able to say, for me to say this was a successful interview, or at the end of this interview, if these questions, particular questions have been answered, I'll say that this was a successful interview. So what are those? Okay. And at the end, again, it's just like at the beginning, you want to make sure that you close off in a way that leaves a person not carrying a lot of emotions, a lot of baggage. So the kinds of questions also that you have towards the end have to also create that atmosphere where you are closing off. Right. And also allowing space for the participants to also reflect as well. So how was the interview for you? Is there anything maybe that I didn't ask you that perhaps you may have wanted to share with me? Some reflections on how this process of the interview was for you, anything else that you would like to add? So you might want to close your interview that way. Now, preparing for your interview is also very important. You don't want to get to the interview and realize that you've forgotten your recorder. You don't want to get to the interview and realize that, oh my goodness, I forgot to charge. If you're using your phone, for example, that you don't have enough battery. And then in the middle of the interview, like, oh no, can we stop? I want to charge just for a little bit. And then we can continue because I don't want to lose the recording or lose what you're saying. Make sure that you are prepared. Make sure that if you need a backup, you have a backup with you as well. Okay. And how do you look? Presentation is also very important. How you present yourself when you go to the interview also speaks a lot. Before you even open your mouth, before you even start with the interview process, how you present yourself and walk through the door already tells your participant a lot. So think about appearances as well and make sure that you are presentable as you go into the participant. It's also about respecting the next person as well, right? We're doing interviews in different contexts. We're doing interviews with different people, and we're doing interviews with people that might be from a different culture than our own. Do the work of trying to get some understanding of the culture of the participants that you're going to be engaging in. Do that work because it also shows that you take people serious enough. Know how you greet people, know what is required when you're sitting with the elders, right? Know how you need to present yourself if you're going to be engaging or interviewing men or interviewing women. Those are also very, very important. If you're doing research, perhaps in a corrections facility in prison, what are the requirements? What is allowed? What is not allowed? Do your homework before you go for that interview. So preparation, proper preparation is very, very important. Where are you going to be having this interview? Did you check whether the place is conducive, is comfortable? Are you going to be having the interview in a restaurant, in a coffee shop? Is it noisy there? Is it the kind of place that the interviewee is going to be comfortable with? So where is that going to be taking place? So it's also important to have that conversation before the interview with the participant in terms of their preferred location for the interview. Control issues in the interview, you also need to check yourself, right? And remember that you are the interviewer. You're not the one who's being interviewed, and it's not about you. So you don't just start talking about yourself more than the interviewee is talking about themselves. The interview is about you trying to discover, trying to explore, trying to get in-depth understanding of the experiences and lived realities of the person that you're interviewing, right? So issues of controlling the space as well. You might get also very strong-willed, strong personalities in the interview. How do you manage that as well? Okay, so make sure that in your engagement with the participants, you're very aware also of different personalities that come into the space, and try to find ways to be able to manage that in a way that still makes your interview a successful one. Explaining the purpose of the interview, even if you've spoken on the phone, even if you sent an email, on the actual day of the interview, it's important to go through all of those things again, making sure that there is consent and understanding also consent within the context that you're going to be doing the interview in. Again, that you make sure that you explain the purpose, how long it's going to take, so that people can also plan well. You do that beforehand, but also on the day that, I don't anticipate that the interview will go on for more than an hour. The interview will be for an hour or not more than an hour and a half. Thank you for your time and availing yourself to speak to me on this particular issue. Please be aware that what we discuss here is going to remain confidential between me and you. I am a student, and so I'm working under supervision at the university, and therefore my supervisor will have access also to the transcripts as is part of my learning journey as they give me feedback. So it's also part of my studies, so that people also understand as well, and explaining what's going to happen with the data, and getting their consent in terms of the utilization of the data, and recording also, requesting to record. Having plan B as well, if someone is not comfortable with you recording. Again, here it also depends on the kind of topic that you are focusing on, its sensitivity, and how comfortable the participant is with the recording of the interview. And if you cannot record, what is plan B? Are you going to be taking notes? Have you brought a notebook? Are they okay with you taking notes? So how do you then work with all those possibilities, right? What is a good interview? What does a good interview look like? You need to be clear about what the purpose of the interview is. There should not be any confusion or doubt from the participants about what the interview's purpose is. Sometimes when the student comes and they have the transcript, and when you look at the transcript and you're thinking, but this is what we have here. They did not really say much, or they did not say enough, or they did not really ask the questions that you were asking them. And could it be that maybe there was a misunderstanding in terms of what you were looking at, what you were interested in? So it's also very important. Clarity is important, because clarity contributes towards good interview. And a good interview you see by the kinds of responses or data that we then have at the end of that interview. And don't be uncomfortable with the pauses. Sometimes a person just needs to take a moment to go back to that time that you are asking them to go to. You're asking me to remember or to visit a place that perhaps I have not visited in a long time. Maybe this is something that happened 10 years ago. Maybe this is something that happened 15 years ago. And now in this moment, as I'm talking to you as the participant, I need to just reflect. I need to take a moment to gather my thoughts and think about how I would like to articulate that which is in me in a way that answers your question in a way that is legible for you. So pauses are okay. Pauses actually offer time for reflection. So do not be uncomfortable with the pauses as a researcher. And please, we come from academia. We come from all our various disciplines. Sometimes when the lawyers speak, I have no idea what they're saying because of the jargon of the discipline. If you are from economics, if you are from logistics, if you are from philosophy, all the various disciplines have got their jargon that they use. So remember, you are talking to someone who may not be or who is not in your discipline and not conversant with the kinds of jargon that you're using. And this is how sometimes people may even misunderstand what you're saying or the questions that you're asking, and then you lose out on good responses for your interview. We always say, think of a grade 8 learner. So structure your questions, the engagement in such a way that a grade 8 learner can understand clearly what it is that you're talking about, what it is that you're asking them. Practice your questions with a friend, with a family member. If they can understand what you're asking them, then you are on the right track. And if they keep asking, what do you mean? What do you mean? Then you know that perhaps you need to rethink and reformulate the questions that you have. And of course, you're going to be working on these alongside your supervisor. And your supervisor would have assisted you with your interview questions, so that by the time you go out and actually conduct these interviews, questions are as clear as can be. Okay. Guide the participant on the structure of the interview. So this is what I'm interested in, but we're going to start first by looking at who you are, where you come from, where you grew up, and some background about yourself. I'm interested in knowing you. And then from there, we can delve deep into this issue or this matter that I would like us to engage in. So, and assist me to know and to get a sense of how the process is going to unfold. Okay. And if the person does not understand a question, or based on the answer that they've given you, you get a sense that they did not understand the question, rephrase the question, or the participant might ask you to rephrase the question, and open space for that as well. Okay. So you use questions as prompts, of course, and you probe as well as the interview goes. And these questions are they open up space for conversation between you and the participant. Pay attention to body language. The body also speaks as well. How a person uses their eyes, how they uses their hands, are they fidgeting, at what point or in which moment in the interview do you see different kinds of moments where a person seems a bit uncomfortable? So what kind of emotions or what kind of reactions are the interviews eliciting from your participants? And that also forms part of the data. So it's not only about what's being said, it's how it's being said, but it's also how the body is used as well. You steer the conversation as the interviewer, as the researcher. And also, maybe on question 3, you ask the question and the participant answered in a particular way. And then when you get to question 8, which might be linked or related, but then you're interested in a different angle, when you are asking the question, the way that the person answers the question contradicts what they said in their answer in question 3. So this obviously requires you to be also very attentive, to listen and listen carefully, listen actively, so that when there are contradictions, you can always then refer a person back. Oh, I hear you saying this, but earlier you had indicated that this and that and the other. So I'm just wondering about that, because what you're saying now seems to go against perhaps what you said earlier. And I'm wondering whether you would like to comment on that so that I can understand better. So don't be confrontational in a way that says, no, but that's not what you said earlier. What do you mean? So also how you phrase it, it should be in such a way that allows for the participant to reflect on their answers that, oh, okay, oh yeah, no, actually what I meant was, or what I mean is, or I said that in this way because in that particular context, I was referring to something different. And now, based on the question that you're asking me, this is how I'm now answering it based on something else that informs my answer to you. And then look at how you put all those things together. Okay. And then be able to interpret and summarize for the interview what they've just said. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that it's quite difficult in one experiences, challenges along the way, if maybe there's no mentorship or if one was not as prepared as they could have been. Am I hearing you correctly? And then a person can say, yes, exactly, that is what I'm saying. And then they can go on and elaborate or just say, yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. Or they can maybe feedback to you and say, no, that's not what I meant. I meant that even though it's challenging, this and that and the other. Okay, so when you do that, when you interpret and summarize back, it also affords the interviewee the opportunity for further clarity or maybe rephrasing things in a way that does not cause misunderstanding on your side. Okay. Don't talk too little, but also don't talk too much. As I said earlier, the interview is about you wanting to get a better understanding on a particular phenomenon, and you're speaking to me as your interviewee because you believe that I can offer that to you so that you're able to answer your research questions. But if you're now talking 40 minutes of the 60 minutes that we have, then what is the whole point of this interview, right? So there has to be a balance where there is a need to just stop for a moment for the reflection and step back. And again, as I said, those pauses sometimes are important, but at the same time, you also need to speak and steer the conversation. Always, 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 ethics at the core of the whole process of the interview. So be ethically sensitive in the whole process. Okay, you also need to make sure that you are non-judgmental. You're doing this research because you want to contribute to knowledge production. You're doing it because you're curious. And curiosity should not be understood or be confused with being inquisitive in a way that you're now feeding your own inquisitiveness about a particular issue at the expense of the research that you're doing. Remain professional and remain ethical in the research that you're doing. And then just to summarize, it should be open-ended. As I said, try as much as possible to avoid yes and no questions. should be as neutral as possible. So do not lead your participants. Ask one question at a time. Do not ask a question that has got 3 questions in it. You also don't want to confuse your participants, okay? Questions should be worded clearly. I've indicated this. Be careful asking why questions, because sometimes when you're asking why, it may come across as if you're being accusatory, like you're accusing the participant in some way, or some people can read it as being somewhat of an accusation, or you're being judgmental. So also be careful when and how you ask the why question. What is the purpose of asking that why question? When you ask the question, but why? Why did you do this? Why did you follow this? Why, did you make these kinds of decisions that you made in your life? The purpose of the question. Follow up and clarify where needed. Don't interrupt. So when a person is talking and they're responding to a question, don't interrupt. Even if maybe as they're talking, a thought comes to your mind. That's why I said you can probe. So they may answer, and then through their answering, as they're answering, it brings up something in you. Don't interrupt. Wait for them to finish, and then you can take them back to what they've just said. You can probe based on what they've just said. I've already said don't be judgmental, and don't debate responses. Remember, we said that here it's about how reality is constructed. It's about the lived realities and experiences of the participants, and that's why you're speaking to them. So you should try not to dispute what people are saying. What is your research? What if people are saying things that are controversial, if people are saying something that things that are racist, for example, in what way do you try to challenge that? That might come across, that might be perceived as being a racist. Do you think perhaps uttering such words might get one into, or might get others to believe that perhaps you are a racist person? So the way that you also phrase it as well is very important. Okay, so through again the summary, the prompts, look at the verbal, look at how, or listen to what is being said, but also listen to what is not being said, right? You also make sure that you are with the participant, you are present. So as the person is talking, they're responding. To show that you're listening to them, you might nod. And your posture should be an open posture that is welcoming. And then as the person is talking, you might say things like, yeah, sure, yes, I see, oh, okay. So that way a person shows that, okay, I'm being listened to, this person is present, this person is here. You obviously don't want to overdo it as well. So try to also strike a balance. You're not going to say, yeah. At the same time, in a way that also might be disturbing to a person narrating their experience to you. And if a person has responded, some of the ways in which you probe, you might ask questions like, I don't quite understand. So what you've just said, or what you're saying, or when you say this, what do you mean? Or can you elaborate on this and that, right? So you said this and that, but I'm still confused. Can you perhaps maybe explain to me this, that, and the other? So these are some of the ways in which you can probe your participant. Okay, so that's the issue. Can you tell me more? So you're saying this and that and that. Can you tell me more about that? What do you mean when you say this? What do you mean when you say it was not your choice? So what exactly happened, right? The person said, this and that happened, it was not my choice, and there was nothing I could do with about it. So what do you mean when you say it was not your choice? What was going on? What is it that happened, right? and then repeating a phrase or word used by the participant, sorry, they said client, by the participant in a questioning tone is also very important. Okay, and then I've spoken about summarizing, you're making sure that you're on the same page, and then you show the person that you've been listening to them, and that you understood and heard what they said. How do you capture the interview? Many different ways in which to do this. Again, depending on the context where you're conducting the research. Audio recording is the most common one that we use most of the time because it's easier. At the end of the interview, you can transcribe and then you have that raw data that you can work with yourself, or you get someone else to assist you. And then you can always go back to the transcriptions. And then when you have the transcriptions, the data, you can even add your notes and your thoughts and your reflections. And this helps you later on when it comes to the analysis of the data. You can also, in addition, use field notes. You might be in an area where you're not allowed to bring an audio recorder. So if, for example, you're doing your research in a highly sensitive environment where there's a lot of secrecy, for example, or people feel that by having an actual audio recording might put them at risk when you're doing your research in a prison, correctional facility, you're not allowed, the rules of such a space does not allow for you to come with an audio recorder to do your research there. So then you can take field notes. So you must always have a notebook, make sure that you use field notes. And then for most of the research, what is now commonly being used in qualitative research is ensuring pseudonyms are used. But this is now also part of the conversations and debates that we're having, that should it be automatic that you use a pseudonym for your participant, it can also be something that is negotiated. Again, depending on who you're interviewing, how sensitive the context or the matter is, or whether if a person, it's known that it's this person who shared their information, it might lead to them experiencing stigma, it might put them in danger in some ways. So pseudonyms might be useful, but it should not just be assumed that everyone would like to use pseudonyms. So it should also be something that is negotiated. Some participants might want to have their real names used so that it can be seen that this is their story and that they want to own the story that they're sharing. And also, as part of the decolonial Africanization agenda, we understand the importance of names and naming, that people's names also carry their identity, that if you're going to use a pseudonym next to my story, next to my narrative, then it's no longer my narrative. It's someone else's narrative, because our names within the African context are not just names, they actually are linked to our history, our cultures, our bigger clan or ethnic group, if you will. So it's also very important to also check and not assume that you can just use pseudonyms. Okay. And where needed, replacing identifying information. So how are you going to do this? Are you going to use the real names? Are you going to use synonyms? Or are you going to use, some people use alphabets, P1, P2, P3. So that means participant 1, participant 2. So again, sometimes those might be perceived as being very impersonal. Sometimes, again, they're used because you want to remove the identifying markers. Again, here, some of these principles that we're using, that we've just adopted, come also from the positivist paradigm, where they just being applied even in the qualitative space and qualitative paradigm. And these are some of the things that we also need to critique and have a conversation about. So even as you're working on your proposal, on your own research, these are some of the things that you should constantly be reflecting on. If you're saying you're doing work that is emancipatory, that is transformative, that is critical, that is Afrocentric, does it make sense, therefore, to use synonyms? What does that do? What does that mean? Understanding the cosmology and context of Africa and the important role that names play. So what does that mean in terms of how you make that decision as a researcher with the kind of research that you're doing? Performing member checks is also very important. You've done your research. It's important to go back to the community, to the participants that you conducted the research with, and then show them. So those transcripts, the notes that you've written, you're checking whether you've checked them correctly. Are they happy with how you have put down the narrative in the way that you understood it and made sense of it before you can finalize your results? So member checking is very, very important. One of the challenges as part of the ethical dilemma or ethics in research is the feedback that we're getting from communities, that as researchers, as scholars, we use communities and then we never go back to communities. Go back to do member checking, but also go back even after you have completed your study. So what recommendations did you come up with? What conclusions did you come up with? And sharing that with the community, that as a result of what you've shared with me, these are the recommendations that I've put forward. These are the things that have been suggested as possible interventions for some of the issues that we discussed, or to bring about change when it comes to this what issue or challenge that we're confronting, the rethinking of this phenomenon. Okay, so now moving into the sample size in qualitative data. In yesterday's session, a question came around what is an acceptable number in qualitative research? How do you determine sample size for qualitative research? And broadly, a sample size should be large enough to sufficiently describe the phenomenon, right, of interest. So the sample that you have, does it assist you to be able to describe that phenomena? Does it address the research question? So you've interviewed 10 people, and based on these interviews that you've conducted, would you say that the research question that you have has been answered based on the responses that you got from your participants? If your answer is yes, then you are done. But if maybe it's not sufficiently or adequately answered, then perhaps you still need to conduct more interviews. But at the same time, a large sample risks having repetitive data, and that is why we speak of saturation, right? So the goal of qualitative research is about attaining saturation. And there is no clear answer to say when you have completed interviews with 10 or 20 or 35 people, you would have reached saturation. So each circumstance could be different. What people are going to share with you and what people might share with me in a different context might be different, right? So what is the minimum number? How many interviews are enough, right? So if you go through literature, and again, literature will assist you, it's very important. As I said yesterday, this is not a new question, that question that has been asked by many people, leading to then, of course, research on it to try and look and check, but what is a sufficient number? So a number of articles, a number of book chapters that have been written by scholars, books, recommend that anything between 5 and 15 can be adequate. And as you can see, this is a huge, the space in between is quite huge, right? So you have interviewed 5 people. I have interviewed 50 people. So, but at 5, I reached my saturation. And you, when you were at interview 29, you had still not reached saturation. Your research question had not been adequately addressed, right? And again, depending on the different things or a thing that you are interested in, it might require that perhaps you interview 5 people to answer question 1, and 5 people and 5 people. So depending again on how many research questions do you have, are they interconnected, interrelated, and who are the different people that you're going to be looking at to assist you to answer this question. But what is the minimum sample size that colleagues have agreed on to say, okay, this is what's acceptable? As I said, there's been many, many debates. So these scholars here that I've mentioned have recommended that qualitative study require a minimum sample of at least 12 to reach saturation. So as you're writing your proposal, as you're going to go and do your research, you can then make a decision on how many participants you're going to go for, right? And this is now what you're proposing, that you're going to be looking at so many people. And sometimes you might say you're going to interview 20 people, and then when you go out, you find that it's difficult for you to get 20 people. You could only get 14 people. Does not mean that your research now has failed. It was insufficient. The research says that even with 12 people, you can reach saturation. Okay. And the recommendation of at least anything between 5 to 50 people is critical also, because it's also determined by the kind of research that you're doing. If you're going to be interviewing students' experiences of students' experiences of living away from home for the first time, now that they're at university and staying maybe in flats or apartments or staying at res. So what is that experience like, being away from parents? Chances are you might be able, it might be easier for you to get a higher number of participants vis-a-vis me, who's interested in experiences of child soldiers. How easy is it to access child soldiers, right? How easy is it to access people who are in the militia, who are underground, for example? And I'm interested in saying, what makes someone make the decision to go and join the militia? What makes someone go and decide that they're going to fight for their country in the way that these people are, and saying they're going to challenge the government, for example? So what the kind of questions that you ask and the phenomenon that you're looking at will also contribute and influence the number of participants that you might end up having. For someone like me, who's interested in child soldiers, chances are I might not be able to easily get access to 50 participants, obviously, but I might get access to 5 participants. But because this is a scarce kind of participants, right, a focused study, it will be acceptable. And this is something that I need to also justify and express in my chapter on methodology, that the reason why I'm anticipating that I will interview 5, it's because of the scarcity or the difficulty in getting access to this population. Just as easy as saying, oh no, I'm going to interview 10 people, or I'm going to interview 5 people, I'm going to interview 20 people. So that's why you, as the researcher, the justification that you offer me as your reader has to be convincing. Remember, there's going to be examiners at the end of this. There's going to be external examiners out there who are going to read your work, and you're not going to be there to explain to them why you only have 5 participants or 8 participants. So what you put in your chapter in explaining the number of participants that you have will assist me as your examiner to say, oh, okay, no, this makes sense, of course. Then this number would be sufficient because of the phenomenon that they're looking at and the kinds of complexities based on the focus of the students' research. So make sure that you make an argument. Make an argument for the choices that you're making. I may not agree with you, but I need to be convinced by the argument that you're making for the decisions that you have put forward, right? We always speak about making an argument from the very beginning to say why it's important. Why is this a problem? Why should there be a PhD on this topic? So you need to make an argument for why this is an issue, why this is a problem, right? And it's because you've read, you've identified a gap, you've been observing, the statistics show us this and that. Why, right? So make that argument for the need for this kind of research. So same here as well, make an argument for why it's okay for you to have this number of participants. But of course, just more broadly, more generally, within qualitative research, what you need to be aiming for is saturation. That after 7 participants, you started hearing the same thing now. You started hearing the same thing. And therefore, you stopped doing the interviews, right? That's how you reach saturation. So moving from interviews to another method of data collection, which is focus groups. So focus groups are a form of group interview. So you're not interviewing individuals, but you're having a conversation with people in a group context, right? And you often do this because you're interested in people's perceptions on a particular issue. Those of you who are in the economic and management sciences, this might resonate with you because when it comes to issues on market research, within your space, focus groups tend to be a method that is often used. You're interested in what is it that customers are interested in. What is it that the clients are likely to respond towards? What kind of colors, what kind of lighting, what kind of style and the brand of something would people be interested in? But also you might be interested in things that happen within communities and saying what are communities' perspective on a new legislation that has been put forward? What are the communities' perspective on the changes on the legalization of abortion? What does that mean in the context of a particular culture? What are the implications of that? So what are people's perceptions of that? All right. So you're interested in a variety of opinions. You're interested in the depth of information that people can provide, right? So, and people feed off each other as they are engaging. So as they respond, it might spark something in someone else, which you may not necessarily get in an individual interview. So also need to have a reason why you want to do focus groups, right? The group dynamics is something that you also need to be aware of. Who is in the room? Who have you put together in the room? Some people might be talkative, some people might be shy. So as the interviewer, you also need to be very vigilant in terms of ensuring that not only one voice overpowers other voices. And just like in the individual interviews, you read the room, you look at the dynamics, and where needed, you might also want to probe as well. Okay, we've heard quite a lot that's being said and the responses that we're hearing. So without trying to put someone on the spot, but you might want to also call out on someone. So you, Thabo, have not said anything, and I was wondering whether perhaps you also had some thoughts on what others have been saying, or you have some thoughts on this issue that I've put on the table. Okay. And how many participants should be there? You also don't want to have too many people because some people might disappear in a group if it's too large, and you also don't want to have too small a group, because then it's as if people feel like they're put on the spot as well. So the suggested number for focus groups is anything between 6 and 10 people for you to really have a conversation that is flowing, that allows for the group interview to be successful. How many focus groups? Sometimes just even one focus group. But again, depending on what it is that you're looking for, the one focus group, have you managed to get the answer to your question? But often it's suggested that anything between 3 and 4 focus groups can assist you to reach saturation. Okay, so these are some of the numbers that you would work with, and then you back that up, of course, with literature as well. Like literature indicates that 3 to 4 focus groups can assist one to reach saturation. So this is why for my study, I'm going to conduct 3 focus groups. Okay. We talked about individual interviews. A focus group is not just another interview. It's very different, right? You're also not just interested in what people are saying in the space, just like with the interviews when we're talking about the verbal and the non-verbal. Here also, it's about observing group dynamics. It's about group performance. It's about interactive talk, where someone says something and then somebody else adds on what they're saying, or they dispute what the other person is saying. And all of these interactions are very important for what you're looking at and what you're focusing on. All right. So the group is your unit of analysis and not individuals in the group. So you're not looking at individuals, but the group as a whole. And it is that group, that is what's called the focus group, that then becomes your unit of analysis. Okay. So even how you then analyze the data, it should be based on the data that came from the collective, the group, right? Not one of the 10 people said this and then 3 of the people said this. It's not about that kind of individualization. Power differentials. Be very careful also how you put together your focus group. So who is in the focus group and what is the focus of the engagement that you want to have? Are you interested in some of the challenges in the workplace, for example, and you're looking at a particular workplace and you're conducting a focus group? Is it advisable? Does it make sense to have the employers and the employees in the room? The issues of power and hierarchy also play a critical role. Will the employees feel free and safe enough to be able to speak freely in the context where the employers are in the room, right? And so when you're thinking about focus groups, so you may think of different ways to structure it. You can say, okay, I'm interested in the voices of both the employers and the employees. So the way that I would do it, I will have a focus group just engaging with the employees, a focus group just engaging with the employers, and then a focus group with everybody together. So that even if there are power differentials, you also have voices of each separately as well. And so in your analysis, you'll be looking at all of these things. And you'll also be looking at, some of the things that came up when I was talking with the employees did not come up when they were together with the employers. What does that mean in terms of the dynamics as well within the workplace, right? Is it better to have strangers? Is it better to have acquaintances? You can do both, right? Sometimes when people don't know each other, they're more open, more free, and sometimes when people are with acquaintances, they can be more open and more free. What is the topic that you're looking at? Am I going to be comfortable talking about the issues and challenges of abortion within a group context with people who are from my community, people who know me, people who are my neighbors. So these dynamics also need to be taken care of. Are you looking at the experts? Are you looking at the novices, right? And also in terms of stratification, how are you going to look at gender? If you're going to have 10 participants, are you going to make sure that it's 5-5, or does it not matter? So what is the role of gender in the kind of engagement that you want to have, right? Is there a gender lens? Is there race? Is there age? Are you going to have older and younger people? And why? So are you interested in an intergenerational conversation? Are you interested in an interracial conversation? And what determines this? What influences this? This is influenced by your research question. Would having multiracial voices make sense and assist you to answer your research question, right? So does it matter? Does it play a role? It's very important. Okay. So when you analyze within the focus group, when you're collecting the data, as I've indicated, it's about content, what people are saying, but it's also about observing group dynamics and interactions. How do the group, or how does the group arrive at a collective opinion? Are they agreeing with each other on particular issues? Are they disagreeing with each other on particular issues? And when people are disagreeing with each other, do they negotiate that disagreement, or is it just left as is? Perhaps two people agree, two people disagree, giving them a voice to also engage on why they disagree. So, and then looking at all of that then forms part of your data and what you're going to be looking at, right? Your role as the moderator, as the facilitator, how does it affect group dynamics, right? The culture that you're coming from and the culture of the people that you're going to be facilitating the group with, does that play a role? These are some of the things that you also, as a researcher, need to reflect on as well. So reflection or reflexivity becomes very critical. What is the reading of the group? So, and this is why also observing and taking notes, and immediately after the interview or the focus group, reflecting and noting down some of these is also important, because it forms part of the overall data or results of your study. So your reading of the group is also very important. How do you deal with dominant voices and opinions? How do you then bring the group back together is also very important. And that can only happen if you are aware and you observe and you start noticing and realizing. This is when you start probing. This is where you also start intervening, but not intervening in such a way that you take over the process. So the number of questions for an interview or a focus group discussion. Opening questions, right? Based on facts, again, just opening up the focus group, and you start with your introductory engagements, and it fosters interaction. So where people maybe might do some introductions, and again, as you can see, this also speaks to issues of anonymity within the space. And when we talk about confidentiality, group confidentiality, so the ways in which you would think about confidentiality or anonymity would be very different within a focus group than it would be in an individual setting. So here you also have group confidentiality where everybody agrees, right? And then from the introduction, introducing the topic in context. This is where we are within the work context, within the manufacturing field. These are some of the issues that we're confronted with. And so I was interested in some of the perceptions in terms of some of the changes or some of the complexities or some of the challenges that we are now seeing in this space. And how have you been experiencing that, or how have people been experiencing that? again, because you also don't want to personalize it. Even though sometimes within focus groups, people kind of combine, they speak more broadly on perceptions, but some people will also bring their experiences in the space as well. And that's why the introductory part is so important, because at some point, some people bring themselves into the conversation. How many questions? Again, you might have one big question followed by the next, and then you just engage by probing. So you open up the space and then you probe. Or you might have 5 questions that are ready, that you have with you, that you will then ask in case there are no questions. Leading questions, don't lead participants. So avoid giving examples, because sometimes when you give examples, you lead people towards a particular direction. So you also don't want to make sure to contaminate your data, right, by leading people and then having people say what they think you want to hear. And just like with the individual interviews, you also want to avoid asking the why questions. Okay, you may use case studies, you may use what we call vignettes, where you provide some form of an example or a scenario, and then ask people to reflect or to speak on this scenario. That often works within focus group scenarios. Okay, so the discussion guide, the that you're going to be the guiding questions for focus groups, that we call the discussion guide. So with the individual interviews, we call them interview guide, and then the discussion guide. So what is the discussion guide? It's an agenda, the themes, the questions that you have for a focus group discussion. And you develop this from your research objectives. Again, I'm repeating myself a lot here, and I do this because it's so critical, right? It's so critical that the discussion has to be informed by your aims and objectives. The discussion at the end of the day is meant to assist you as the researcher to achieve these objectives. So you develop them from the research objective. Go back to your research objectives, and then based on your research objective, carve the discussion guide possibilities of what conversations you're going to have in the focus group, right? And you have a discussion guide because it's going to assist you to be focused and have direction for your discussion. Again, order from general to specific. It can be from the most to the least important. And of course, all of them are important, but then you can put them in a form of a hierarchy if you want. And they assist you as the researcher, as the moderator, to think about the important points that you want to cover as part of the discussion, right? You can improvise along the way based on how people are answering, how people are responding. Are they now going off track, or are they maybe bringing up things that you think are interesting that you want to build on as well? So there's also room for improvisation. Always remembering that it's not a questionnaire, just like with the interview guide, it's not a questionnaire. There's room for probing and openness. Okay. Here also, this is just going to the very specific, as you think about what would this look like, right? And how do you come in as the moderator in this space where people are having this conversation? You set the tone for the conversation, right? You provide the ground rules, because when you're working in a group scenario, it's very important for people to understand that we're here to listen to each other. We're going to respect each other's opinion. We're not going to tear each other down. No contribution is a stupid contribution. So all of those things you do at the very beginning, right? And then overview, ground rules, as I said, and then you start off with the first question. right? And then at the end, after the 1 hour or 2 hours, you provide a summary, and then you feed it back to the group for their own inputs towards that summary as well. Okay, reflections, and then asking them to engage. All right. So what does data collection look like within the context of participant observation, which we spoke about yesterday, the different ways in which participant observation can take place. All right. So what is your role as a researcher if you're doing a study where you are being a participant observer? And this can happen in various ways. Yesterday we spoke about the fact that you can be observing and participating fully with people knowing who you are, or participating and observing with people not knowing who you are. And you'll see this picture here. A very good example of from within anthropology field, where a researcher doing a study and then immersing themselves in the community, becoming part of the community. So you can either conceal yourself as a researcher, your role, as I said, so you are part of the community, but they don't know that you're actually doing research on them, or where people know that you're doing research on them, and then they are including you in their activities. All right. And then as a complete observer, where you don't participate at all, this is where you're just observing. So you can be observing when you are there in the community, but outside, looking in. So you're outside looking in. And sometimes you may even observe from behind one-way glass mirror, or a one-way glass, or a mirror, right? Something that often happens, or used to happen, maybe not so much anymore, but I know many experimentalists are still doing it within the psychology discipline. A lot of observing of human behavior was done or is done behind one-way glass mirror. Okay, to observe and see people's reactions towards something, to try and understand and be able to theorize on human behavior when they are in moments of stress, in moments where they feel uncomfortable, or where they're so in different circumstances, how do people behave? And sometimes there's this complete observation without participating, but then taking note of what it is that you're observing. So this is something that you can do as a researcher. I said yesterday, you're looking in using binoculars as an outsider. Types of observations. So it could be completely structured, systematic observations, where you employ an observation schedule. So in the case of the example that I gave within the psychology discipline, if you are just observing, you're observing behavior, there are specific things that you would be observing. So this is where a structured observation would become relevant. So there's an observation schedule. So you're saying, I want to see how long within the first 5 minutes, what kind of reaction is this person going to have? And so you look at the time, for example, so that's what you put down. And then you're also saying you're looking at the reaction. You might be interested in the interaction if you have more than one person in the room. So there is a schedule in terms of the specific things that you are observing, right? And if you are in the field, again, same thing. What is it that you are interested in within that particular community? So you observe specific things that will lead you to be able to answer your research questions. Okay. And of course, there's also unstructured observation. So this is now just in a natural environment or natural observation. So you're not focusing on only specific aspects of the engagement, but you're interested in how things naturally occur. And through that natural occurrence, what is it that you're observing in those moments? But especially with this one, where we spoke about concealing your role as a researcher. If you're going to be concealing your role, then chances are you did not get informed consent, did you? Right? So there's quite a number of research projects where for the researcher to be able to get what they want, the idea is that I do not want to influence the environment, the community, the people that I'm interested in. Therefore, I'm going to just observe, or I'm going to pretend as if I'm one of them, but through those processes, I'm going to be gathering the data. And we know then in those circumstances, informed consent is not going to be possible, because there is also deception that is involved. And this immediately violates the principle of privacy. So if I did not consent, how are you then going to take all this data and then write about me? All right. So think of the researcher as like an undercover investigator, if you will. You know, those undercover investigators where they go and they join a community, and the investigator pretends as if they are a member of that community. So you're interested in the daily life or daily experiences of drug dealers, right? Sometimes it can even be very dangerous. The daily experiences of the underground world, the things that people do in the dark after night in those communities where you need a code to enter, for example. So you find ways to be able to also be part of the community and get the code. And then you enter that space as if you are also a participant in that space, but you are observing. And sometimes people go the extra mile of actually even participating. And of course, again, there's a lot of violations there in terms of ethics as given by the university and protecting you as the researcher as well, but ethics also in terms of the deception for the people that you are observing as well. The responsibility of the university is to also ensure that as you're going out there, you are as safe as can be, you know, as much as the university can be able to assist towards that. And that's why certain forms of research would not get ethical clearance. And much of this was happening many years ago, where ethics principles were not yet put in place. But we know that even though there are ethics principles now that are mandatory, we still have research that is conducted by some scholars that does not follow the ethics principles. So I'm sharing this with you. We're having this lecture so that you are aware, but also understand some of these slippages, right? Understand how sometimes as a researcher, as a scholar, one might fall into some of these spaces. And therefore, it's important for us to understand the ethical dilemmas that one might be confronted with. Okay, so all of these are issues around ethical dilemmas, especially when it comes to participant observations. Okay. The ways in which one would collect data as part of observation studies is that you observed phenomena, and then you describe, you describe what you see. You do not make any judgments or conclusions. You describe, so it's descriptive, so it can be that, right? And then you provide an analysis, an interpretation of what you have observed, right? What does this mean? What does this tell us? What is it that we can understand based on this observation and how you've described it, right? What does it mean? And then reflections on how your description and analysis was done. the method that you used. So how did you observe? Did you observe from within or did you observe from outside? How did you do it? Were you a participant observer, not a participant observer? So the method that you used as well. Ethical issues, complexities, dilemmas, and how you worked around those, how you incorporated ethics in the work that you did. And what were some of the reactions of the observers, those who might have noted or noticed you? What were some of the reactions? So this is then part of the reflection, all right? So you clarify, you write up, you provide further inquiry or suggestions for further inquiry. So this is now all inclusive in terms of observations. You observe on site and you make notes after observing. You can do a recording, and then these are some of the things that you will then reflect on as part of your field notes. The space where you were, what the space looked like, what you choose to record and note down, the actors, who were the people that you observed, who was around, who was available, who did you observe, and the activities, what activities were their ways, what was going on, what objects did you see, what time was it in the morning, was it during the day, right? And what was the goal of you observing in the morning, or observing what you chose to observe, and feelings that were also invoked by this, feelings and emotions that were observed by this, and you write this up, and you can even also provide this in a form of a diagram as well. And why do we do this? You go and do observations because you're interested in gathering live data, right? So you don't want to just sit down with a person and say, please tell me about your experience of attending a live show, going to Durban July. What is that about? What does that mean? What is the culture of Durban July? So you are there, you're observing people as they interact, you're observing people in the activities that are happening there, how they interact with the horse racing and all of that. So you're interested in the live data, what happens in that moment, right? And you want to have first-hand information, and you want to experience that context. So you are there, you are experiencing it even as you're observing it. And then you do this because you're also interested in what are some of the nuances, what are some of the things that are there, but that people may miss and not consciously think about or consciously see, because they're just in the hype of the excitement and they're part of the activities. So they're not looking in with a critical eye or a critical lens. So that's why you do this kind of research, so that at the end of the day, you can provide an understanding, or you can provide a theorization in terms of what such spaces mean and what they offer people, right? And then visual methods, once again, I'm going to start moving quickly because I'm looking at the time. So I'm just going to go quickly on these. One of the other methodologies that we have that has now really made its way as part of the critical emancipatory paradigm is the visual methodologies. So visual research is part of qualitative research, and it's interested in artistic expression as a form of data. And often here, we're thinking about film, we're thinking about photographies, how we use photographs as a form of data, drawings, paintings, and what we can learn from all of these. And it's about the person capturing what it is that they capture, interpretation of the visuals that we have in front of us, right? And then we have another method that is called photo voice. So instead of going out and interviewing people, you give people cameras. It could be disposable cameras. And you say you're interested in people's, and Curtis, if I may use your example from Monday, when you were asking about service delivery within the Tshwane municipality. So you're interested in what does service delivery mean for community members within the Tshwane municipality, right? What does it look like? What does it involve? What does it include? And so you're interested in people's own understanding and interpretation of what they would like to have as service delivery, or what service delivery should look like for them. So you give people cameras, and then they go into and you say, go out into the community, and then come back and take pictures of what service delivery means to you, or what you see as challenges around service delivery. And then people come with pictures, right? So they can come back with images, maybe of clinics, images of school, images of potholes, images of their community and children playing in the streets, and saying perhaps maybe we need parks, and look, so different parts of the community that people might click, right? People might take photos of. And now, because we're having smartphones, you may negotiate with the community members or people that you want to have participating in your research to maybe use their phones to take these pictures, because we don't really use cameras anymore, right? Especially disposable cameras, especially, unless if you're using these very sophisticated, expensive, very good quality cameras, which obviously as a researcher you may not be able to afford. But when people come back with these pictures will afford you the opportunity to get an idea, a view of what as service delivery, right? So you then have conversations, you look at co-constructing, collectively interpreting what the images mean. So a person will not just bring a picture to you and then you decide what this picture means. And this is where, when we're talking about the importance of collaboration and co-creation, participatory action research looks like, because you are co-creating, you are co-producing the data with the participants, and they are deciding on what data is relevant for the kind of question that you would have asked as the researcher. I really hope Curtis is in this session today, and that this is something that he might consider for his own research as well, because this is how we move towards emancipatory form of doing research. Okay, and then film again. You go and you shoot footage, and you shoot films, and then you're doing films for different reasons. You want to document a particular moment, a particular experience. You document, actually make the film, or you already have a film in mind and say, how can we use this film to get people's opinion on a particular issue, right? So those of you who are in communication science, for example, could also consider film as a method of data collection, where people watch a film and then they offer feedback. Okay. And this just continues in terms of how you can imagine and think about using films. Okay, and then photo historias, very much aligned or similar to photo voice, but also in a way that you might be interested in family history, for example, and so you can ask your participants to maybe come with family photos, and then these photos are used as a prop or something that is a conversation starter. So you still have interviews, but you're also using photos as a way to start up a conversation. So you don't ask a person, tell me about your family, tell me about this particular experience, but you're engaging based on the photo as well. So that brings in another element in terms of how you do the data. And then just quickly, triangulation. Triangulation is important because it assists both in qualitative and quantitative research for the validity of your research and for the credibility of your research, right? You use it because you want to cross-examine. You use a focus group as the example yesterday, a focus group, and also use an individual interview, right? So you use photo, voice, and then, but you also do maybe individual interviews. So you to look at the credibility of the data. Is what you're going to get similar or the same if you're using different forms of data collection, right? So that's what you would use it for. And you can use data triangulation in different ways, right? Methodologically, where you use the different methods, as we've said, or even theory triangulation. You can draw from different theories all at the same time for the research that you're doing. So you're triangulating, okay, this theory assists in this way, that assists in this way, this assists in this way, and you're using all these theories. It can be time consuming because each theory comes with its own set of principles and focus, but then you're drawing from these theories because they're going to provide a more in-depth, more elaborate understanding of the phenomena. And then investigator triangulation, you are students, you're not going to be doing this. This we usually do when we're doing collaborative work, collaborative research, where several investigators you do the analysis and the collection of the data, and then together we work with the data and then see if we all find the same things, right? So you conduct an experiment and then you get a colleague, maybe somewhere in another country or in another institution, to also run that experiment, and we want to see whether we're going to get the same results. And then in environmental triangulation, for those of you who are maybe in agriculture and environmental sciences, you triangulate and say, okay, I'm going to do this research or look at understanding these crops and how they grow in the summer, in the winter, in autumn. So you look at the different environmental influences and see whether they affect or influence the data that you get. If I run this experiment in the morning, is it the same? Is it going to give me the same results as when I run it in the evening or in the afternoon? Does the time of the day influence the kind of results that I get? All right. So data analysis, I'm not sure. I'm now worried about time. And I'm wondering whether I should stop so that we can have the Q&A and then perhaps incorporate data analysis in one of the future sessions that we're going to have. I'm very weary of just talking for 2 hours and not giving you the opportunity to have questions or comments. So I'm just going to make a decision now, and I'll discuss with my colleagues later to say that I'm going to stop here, and then we will continue with the data analysis and other final aspects on qualitative research at a later time. We will communicate that with you, and then perhaps I can incorporate it into one of the sessions that we're going to have in future, because I think it's also very important to respond to your questions as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Okay. All right, and then I'm going to go to the Q&A. I'm stopping because I'm assuming that you will have some questions or some comments, because sometimes it's through these questions that we learn from each other. One might have a question that can actually assist other students as well. So let me not just talk at you. Let's use the evening time to engage. Okay. All right. So Anonymous, you're saying that you are not clear on the point that I made when I was asking that you should be careful on asking the why question. Yes, I'm not saying you should not ask a why question. There are moments when it's important for you to ask the participants why, but you should be very careful as to the reason why you are asking that question, right? I'm trying to think of an example, because sometimes, and the reason for this is that sometimes our own inquisitiveness as researchers get the better of us, right? So you're asking why, because you are curious about why a person has made a particular decision in their life, right? And so again, it depends on the sensitivity of the topic, right? So some topics might lend themselves in making it tricky to ask the why question. So as I'm talking, I'm trying to think of an example of a moment where maybe it is not appropriate for you as the researcher to ask a why question, right? I can't think of an example now, Anonymous, but I think just in just in an overview, my comment would be that as you are carving your research questions, right, as you're putting together your interviews questions schedule, please make sure that you each and every question is meant to answer your research question, your overall research question. Each and every question that you're asking, make sure that it's meant to answer your aims and objectives, right? Maybe I'm still trying to think of an example, because I think sometimes it's easier when one offers an example so that you can be able to see, oh, okay, that makes sense in that context, that when I ask why do you choose to have 5 boyfriends, right? Why do you choose to date multiple partners at the same time, right? Is that assisting you in the research question that you have? It might be, right? Maybe the answer saying that I'm doing this because of the challenges that I have, and they are all giving me money, and I need that money, and so that's why I'm doing it, might be linked to your overall question as to saying you wanting to try to get an understanding of the kinds of decisions that people make when it comes to dating. And then someone says they're dating multiple people, and then you want to probe in that. So in your probing, be very careful to say, is this question that I'm asking, or is this probing assisting me in any way, and is it linked in any way to the overall research question that I have? Or is it me just feeding my curiosity in terms of being curious about what this person has just said? So that's why it's important. Okay. Can you have a mix of data collection methods, specifically focus groups and interviews? Yes, yes. I think this question was posed before we got to that section. And I hope now that we've covered that section that it was answered for you. Absolutely. You can conduct focus groups, and you can do individual interviews. Again, this also forms part of that triangulation, right? That you're interested not only in the perceptions that people have, but you're also interested in the actual that people have. So you're interested in both. And because you're interested in both, it would make sense for you, therefore, to have focus groups and individual interviews. Okay. If it's possible or recommended, what would also be the saturation numbers, or do you have to use the same saturation numbers of the individual data collection methods? Absolutely. You still have to use both saturation numbers, because remember, the one is not necessarily adding on top of the other, if that makes sense. So you cannot say, because I'm doing focus groups, I'll only interview 2 people. Because I'm doing interviews, I'll only do 1 focus group, right? It's also about answering the questions that you have, and you need to understand them independent of each other, because you are drawing from both because you are interested in what they have to offer. It's the same as what I was saying yesterday, that if you're using mixed methods, if you're using qualitative and quantitative, you're drawing from both qualitative and quantitative, you're not going to say, I'll only interview so many people because I'm doing quantitative. Or for quantitative, I won't do as many, or I won't survey as many people because it's also I also have qualitative, so the 2 will balance each other. That's not how you're doing it. They're both serving a particular purpose. You are bringing them together because you also want to have credibility or validity for your research. I've just discussed that now in triangulation, that it's because you want to do both, right? You want to check, from these 10 interviews, I reached saturation at interview 10, and this is what I got. And with the focus group, this is what I got, this is what I looked at. Did I still come, or can I still come to the same conclusions based on the data that I've received? All right, so absolutely anonymous. Saturation numbers will still be the same based on the independent forms of data collection that you're doing. Aluwani, no, I'm not going to be touching on survey questionnaire. I'm leaving that to my colleagues who are going to be focusing on quantitative research. And for qualitative research, we're not going to be looking at survey questionnaire. We're only going to be looking at the actual data collection methods and techniques that are often used in qualitative research. Okay, so even if it's just for descriptive statistics that we use, the colleagues that are going to do quantitative research will cover that. I think for the time that we have, we're focusing specifically on the qualitative research methods that are commonly used within qualitative research. And I'm sure, as you saw, we ran out of time as it is, even with what we are focusing on. So I would encourage you to please make sure that you attend the quantitative research sessions where they'll be discussing survey questionnaires. Okay. Hello, Casimiro. In focus groups where, for example, we have employees, employers, and groups of both, can we use the same questions used in specific groups? Mm-hmm. And when we have a group with both employees and employers, is there a need to change the questions? Absolutely. You can do either or. So you can use the same questions. You have the discussion guides. And remember, your discussion guide is influenced or determined by your literature, by your theory, determined by your aims and objectives, as I've indicated. So those questions would be the same, but then of course the conversations are going to be different. So you as the moderator, as the facilitator, how you then going to pose the questions would be different. Your experiences of working in this environment, right? Your experiences of being an employer in this context, your experiences of being a line manager, a boss in this environment? What does that entail? What are the complexities? What are the challenges, right? So it's the same question, but it's going to be posed differently depending on who you are posing it to. So if you're talking to the employees, it will be carved differently. And if you're going to be talking to the employers, it's going to be carved differently. But what you're looking for or looking at is the same thing, right? So you're interested in experiences of being an employee, but also experiences of being an employer, and then the dynamics therein, and the perceptions therein of what people see as some of the good things, the challenges, things that they wish would be done or could be done differently, and what could be put in place, for example. So all of those things, so that at the end you can say for a thriving work environment, this is what employers could consider, and for employees also to thrive, these are some of the things that need to be in place within a working environment for them to thrive. And when you've done these two differently or separately, use those as well to be able to assist you to carve the discussion guide for the combined group. So you can have the initial questions, but allow yourself the possibility and opportunity to also shift the questions based on the responses that you got from the initial focus groups of the groups separately. Let that lead you and guide you into the questions that you would ask for the combined group. I hope I'm making sense, Casimiro. Is using only qualitative or quantitative research method and not mixed method acceptable for a PhD? Yes, that is the answer. You can use only qualitative, you can use only quantitative. Again, that's going to be guided by your aims and objectives. It's going to be guided by your research question. What is it that you want to find out? That which you want to find out will direct you towards the kind of methods that would be appropriate for your research. So the qualification that you are enrolled for is not the determinant of the method that you should use, whether it should be combined, mixed, or just qual or quant. Okay, so please do not worry about that. It can be either or both. It will be dependent on the question that you have to answer for your study. Shoki, is in your experience when you meet with a participant for the first time for an interview, do you prefer face-to-face or virtual sessions? Which one is more effective considering issues like observing language, etc.? Shoki, my experience would be different, right? Because I've been doing this for a very, very long time. And so there was a time where virtual sessions were not even an option, all right? So it was face-to-face, and needed to find a way to make it work. And the other option would be telephone, right? Because again, resources sometimes determine whether you are able to do a face-to-face or not. And maybe in Pretoria, and people that I want to interview are in Cape Town. I cannot go to Cape Town. It would be a telephone conversation. And of course, we always speak about the advantages and disadvantages of the different methods. When you do an interview over the phone, of course, you're going to miss out on the nonverbal cues. So that means for your research, those are some of the things that you cannot really comment on. Like someone who can comment when they've done a face-to-face session. So to say that one is better than the other would be difficult, because sometimes circumstances make it difficult. We know that between 2020 and around 2022, we did not have the option to do face-to-face, and therefore people could only do virtual. And you still completed and got your qualification. So it's about the preference, again, of the participants. Sometimes if you're going to be interviewing CEOs, that I made an example of earlier, they're very busy people, always in meetings, always traveling. So chances are they might say, I'm interested in being part of your research, but please note that we'll have to do it on Zoom. Face-to-face is not even an option. So sometimes circumstances kind of dictate how the interview is going to be run or scheduled. So all those things play a role. In my personal experience, face-to-face is always the best. So that's a personal preference. It's not saying that it's the best. It's just the preference for me because of what it allows in terms of being in the same space with someone and being able to fully experience them beyond just their words. Okay, so where and if it's possible and resources allow, I always encourage my students to go for face-to-face. Right. Most of the time, people are not much interested to be recorded for what they want to say during focus group discussions. So if recording is necessary, what can we do during such situations? Recording is recommended. It's not mandatory, okay? It's recorded because it makes our lives easy. If something is recorded, it's easier for you to go back to it. You can transcribe, you have everything in front of you, but it does not mean your research will be less efficient or it will be less thorough if your work was not recorded, because there are going to be participants who are going to say, please don't record. Sometimes we record and then at some point the participant will say, no, turn off the recording. What I want to say now, I do not want to have it recorded. Okay, so there are different moments, different stages. Where are you doing your research? If you're doing your research in a correctional facility, there's no way you're going to have it recorded. So you already need to start thinking about other ways in which you're going to record. You are still going to record. You might record it in here, and then as soon as you get home, you start typing it out. You might record it using a notebook, or you can record it using a cell phone, right? Using an accessory that assists you to then go back to it. But all of these things are recording devices. Your brain is a recording device. Your notebook is a recording device. Your recorder or your cell phone is a recording device, right? So it's important to record. Yes, that is necessary, but how you record is dependent on your circumstances, right? It's very, very much dependent on your circumstances. It's not a mandatory that you need to have a physical recording device in the form of a recorder or a notebook. You can have a physical recording device in the form of a good old notebook. Okay. Yes, I've already done that. Thank you. What difference? What is the? What is, okay, I guess you're saying, what is the difference between structural questionnaire in the case of qualitative and quantitative? In the case of quantitative, we're talking about numbers, right? It's numerics. So the questionnaire is structured, and often the answers are predetermined. And as you as the participant are almost directed, right? So the questionnaire is there, it's structured, and you are told, maybe using a Likert scale or the questionnaire, saying between 0 and 10, please rate this between 0 and 10. And then there is a question or there is a statement. So the statement is there, but then you are almost limited in terms of how you can answer that question. So you choose between 1 and 5 or between 1 and 10. So that's a structured questionnaire. And then those numbers, of course, will then be used to be able to come up with an interpretation, to come up with an analysis of how we can understand. In qualitative research, structured questionnaire, which we call the structured interview, and the questions that are there still afford the participant to be able, right? So there are 10 questions that I have for you today. The first question is, please tell me about your experience of 1, 2, and 3. Your answer, thank you so much. Okay, the second question, please tell me about this and that and that and the other, right? Think of someone who's coming to do a survey, or rather someone who's coming to do a census. How many people live in this house? Tell me, do you sleep without eating or not eating? And then you explain. So it's a set of statements, but that allows for the participant to be able to elaborate and express themselves in words. Whereas it's very different with quantitative research, because it's very much predetermined and you only choose the answers that are already there for you. Okay, so there are predetermined answers for you. Is deception allowed during observations, especially when the researcher is aware that the information that they need from the participants is sensitive? No, Anonymous, you are not allowed to deceive your participants, not at all. So when you do observations, you should do observations with the knowledge of the participants, and they should know what is it that you're observing, and they should give you consent for you to observe. So that's very, very important, right? I was giving an overview of how over time research has been done and has evolved. And today we've got ethics principles for that very reason, that we should not deceive people. So no, you cannot. Hi, Curtis. Is it possible to use photo-visual while my study is based on desktop research, qualitative method? Unfortunately not. Curtis, I was kind of hoping that it's a field study. But if it's desktop, no, unless if you're going to do an analysis of images of the different locations within the Tshwane municipality. So what you can do is then maybe look at various images of the different communities, and then the images will be dependent on what it is that you're interested in. So I'd be interested to know what your research question is. And then based on that, you can then say, what does service delivery look like? Well, and you can look at maybe the newspapers. What are some of the things that have been recorded? What are some of the challenges that people have been saying on healthcare, for example, healthcare and service delivery? What are some of the issues that have come up? And so what pictures maybe of hospitals and clinics are there in the media, online, and what can we deduce? What can we learn from them? And what conclusions can you come up with in terms of saying, this is how the municipality can rethink health service provision within the Tshwane municipality, because these pictures show us some of the challenges that are there. We can see here it says there are not enough beds, there are this and that, and this picture shows how people are just sitting on the floor. Then this shows that there is a need, there is lack. So that's how you can do it. You can do desktop research in various ways, and that is one of the ways in which you can do it. I hope that makes sense. I'm conscious of the time. We are now 2 minutes over our time. And I'm scrolling down, I'm looking, there's quite a number of questions. So what we did in the past was that when we run out of, I don't want to take your whole evening, is that I'm going to ask that we park these questions, and then in our next session, even if it's not related to quality research design, even if it's a different topic altogether. What we will do is that we will dedicate the first 15, 20 to half an hour of that session to answering these questions that you have, because I don't want to just leave these questions. I've have a conversation with my colleagues on this. So that is one option. The second option is that I can provide the answers to the questions, and then these can be posted online. And then I will encourage you then to go and look at the answers online. Okay. So, but there will be an announcement, there will be a communication from my colleagues on this after we've decided whether I should, what would make more sense, whether I should start with your questions in the next session, or I should answer your questions, and then we have this published online for everybody else. Okay. With that, I think we're going to pause it here for tonight. And I would like to thank you so much. I'm very happy that there are so many questions. The fact that we've run out of time really shows your engagement with the topic tonight. And for that, I appreciate all of you. I look forward to seeing you in the next session with me, which is going to be next month. Until then, all the best with your proposals and your research. And I look forward to more engagements with you. Okay, everybody, goodbye. Now,
Prof.
Bronwyn and Nell.
Good evening, Prof.
Yes, we're still live.
Let me see.